Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar focusing on racism, discrimination, and xenophobia in the Middle East context. This webinar is part of a series of regional webinars that the World Council of Churches and the Commission of the Churches on International Affairs have been organizing since August this year. And the purpose of these webinars is to understand and see the different manifestations and expressions of racism, xenophobia, and racial discrimination in the different regions of our globe. Our webinar today will be moderated by Mrs. Seta Margosian Hadeshian. She is the Executive Assistant to the General Secretary of the Middle East Council of Churches. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
And a very welcome, very warm welcome to all of the participants to this webinar on racism in the Middle East. All of you are good friends of mine. Raja Bejan, Bernard Sabella, Joyce, we have met. Rebhat, I'm not sure if we have met, neither I have met Mena.
We've met.
We've met?
Yeah, you took me to the Armenian Museum even in Beirut.
See, getting old.
Yeah, me too.
I would like to thank you, and I would like to thank WCC-CCIA Commission of Churches on International Affairs, SEGMA, for giving me this opportunity to moderate this important session on racism in the Middle East. It will not only be a pleasure to present my distinguished guests, but an honor to present all of them who have a huge experience and knowledge about the topics they will be representing. Unfortunately, the phenomenon of racism continues to destroy the dream of millions of people who, for search of better horizons, leave their homes and homelands and travel to distant countries, where they encounter not only disappointments, but xenophobic reactions and experience worst kind of human suffering. Racism is a worldwide phenomenon, and Middle East is also infected in many ways, and manifests in different forms. I will give a very short overview, background picture of the Middle East. Middle East is a continent composed of 17 countries: Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Yemen, Turkey, Tunisia, Palestine, Lebanon, and it goes on. With a total population of 411 million people, of which more than 95% are Muslims. Christians, Alawites, Armenians, Assyrians, Copts, Greeks, Jews, Kurds, Druze, Maronites, Yazidis, Africans, and Asians are denied their place in the society. Intolerance towards non-Arabs, even though they are Muslims, like the expat majority coming from Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Philippines, who are Muslims, suffer worst kind of racist attitudes. The same is true for Copts, Sub-Saharan Africans in Egypt, Blacks in Iraq, Kurds in Syria and Iraq, Shias in Saudi Arabia, and goes on. The Middle East is a continent which receives influxes of migrant workers from Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, and many others. There are 18 million migrant workers in the Arabian Gulf countries. However, with the Iraqi and Syrian wars, there are millions of internally displaced refugees, Iraqis and Syrians, as well as 5 million Syrian refugees in the Middle East. Refugees as well, regardless of the religion and their Arab origin, like Iraqis and Syrians, suffer discrimination and violence of being a refugee for the color of their skin, for their ethnic origin, sectarian differences, or gender. But this is enhanced also by political conflicts and tensions they are undergoing. Having this context as the background of our webinar, we have decided today's topic of racism in the Middle East into 3 parts. The first part will cover the migrant population, and as such, we have taken 2 samples from the Middle East region, Lebanon and the United Arab Emirates, where migrant populations are discriminated against. Joyce Jiha will talk about the plight of migrant workers in Lebanon, and Raja Bejan about discriminatory practices in the United Arab Emirates. The second part will be about the Palestinian people undergoing discriminatory racist attitudes within Palestine, the Middle East, as well as on the international level. After Bernard Sabella and Rifat Assis will be presenting the Palestinian people's plight. The third part will be about the racist attitude towards the Christian Copts in Egypt. Of course, Copts are not the only Christian populations to suffer racism. There are other Christians in Iraq and Armenians, Assyrians in the Arab world who undergo similar fates. Every speaker will have 7 minutes, maximum 10 minutes. And after the two presentations, after the presentation of two speakers, migrant workers, Palestinian issues, and Christians, we will have interaction and we will take questions from the participants. We will begin the webinar with Joyce Jiha, who will talk about racism in Lebanon. I will present Joyce, who is an attorney at law and is registered before the Beirut Bar Association since 2000. She works with Caritas Lebanon since 2014 today in the legal department for both migrants and refugees. She has been nominated as focal point for legal refugees department for 2006 until today. She participated in and organized many conferences on trafficking in persons, the Kafala sponsorship system, and works both in Lebanon as well as in neighboring countries. She also participated in drafting the unified work contract for domestic migrant workers. The floor is yours, Joyce. You're most welcome.
Talking about migrant workers in the Middle East, specifically in Lebanon. I want to go back just a little bit to a historical story about the difference, just to show the difference between Arab women and migrant women who used to work and live in houses. In the past, Arab women, Lebanese as well, used to be sent to families from rural areas to the capital, to Beirut mainly, in order to work. They were sure less vulnerable than migrant workers who come from abroad alone, since the Arab women were sent by their fathers or their elder brother, usually. They came to visit them once per year, not to collect wages, but just to provide them with protection. The employer or the owner of the house where they used to work had the honor to receive them inside his house, to provide them with dignity and adequate protection. However, migrant domestic workers come alone, travel alone. There is difficulty of culture, color, food, religion sometimes. Communication was outside work, contract with few rights, absolutely no freedom. This is just a brief and a story about both situations. What is effectively the legal framework for migrant workers? Lebanon has, in most Middle East countries, migrant workers are excluded from labor law. Lebanese labor law in its Article 7 exclude migrant domestic workers. This is the main source of abuse for them. Xenophobia or the racism start from here. Has ratified many conventions, international conventions, and its constitution respect the international conventions, but still the issue of migrant workers are dealt into the General Security Office, issued the residency permit, and the Ministry of Labor issued the work permit. The situation, the state, all the burden on the employer. He is in charge. He is in charge of the migrant domestic worker. And this leads to freedom of movement. They are imprisoned in houses. They are locked when family is outside. Their passport and ID are withdrawn. They cannot have, in some cases, I'm not talking about all cases and all families, but I'm talking about the majority and the situation, are deprived from food. In some houses, fridges are locked while the family members are outside the house. They cannot even cook their own food because they are not familiar with Lebanese food, which is totally different from their own food. And if they decide flee to I don't want to say to run away, because it's their right to say no, I don't want to work in this house, are subject to arrest, deportation, and are treated as illegal person, despite sometimes that their legal residency is still valid. Racism and the xenophobia for migrant workers starts as well from the country of origin, from the recruitment process itself. How the recruitment agencies, with this asymmetric relation between both parties, have the migrant worker is usually skilled, with an experienced and professional recruitment agency. Sometimes we have migrant workers illiterate, extremely poor. The top of the top, if we can say, is when the passport itself related to date of birth is falsified. We have a trend now of minors domestic workers, of child abuse, of child labor. We have migrant workers who are 11 and 12 years old with a forged passport. From here start the xenophobia. From here start the racism. When documents are issued, then there is misleading. They are misleading workers. Type of work, and wages, especially on these two topics, and especially that they were told not to report any kind of abuse by sponsor, otherwise there will be reported or whatever the sanction is. The recruitment agencies as well continue. This is here, I think it's a crime. These workers with the sponsor that they know they are abusing migrant workers. I'm sure some of recruitment agencies are engaged in human trafficking. And the third step, the contract. Temporary contract. The temporary contract is the preferred one, unfortunately. Why? Because migrant workers cannot benefit from citizenship rights. They cannot change their employer, their sponsor, they wish. They cannot move, they cannot leave the house because they will be subject of arrest and deportation. Even if they got abused by their employer or sponsor, physical, sexual, psychological, which becomes for most of cases a routine, they cannot sue them unless there is a forensic doctor report or a police report investigation. There is evidence the abuse. Sexual harassment cannot be proven sometimes, so they cannot approach the court or the police station in order to sue the perpetrator.
Joyce, Joyce, time is up.
Oh,
It's already 10 minutes. You still have too much?
no, I still need very, very few minutes. So, I will summarize. I will just say one thing about Caritas services. Caritas services in protecting migrant workers, not services provided just inside Lebanon. The Caritas services starts from the country of origin. There is a pre-departure orientation training for migrant workers before coming to Lebanon. Then step 2, once in Lebanon, the general security at the airport, they are provided with a book on their rights and responsibilities with a linguistic guide in each language, translated to languages, to migrant worker languages, with hotlines numbers in order to call once they face any problem. Then we have, during their stay, if they encounter any problem, they can approach Caritas or just call, and there is this MOU signed by several authorities, specifically with general security, between Caritas and general security, allowing Caritas to be present in the retention center, where usually all foreigners are referred. If the migrant worker is sick or is pregnant or she has kids, can be referred to Caritas shelter in order not to stay in the retention center during the investigation process. Caritas lawyers are only lawyers allowed to assist to general security investigations. And we often, as well, social workers often visit prisons to handle migrant worker cases who couldn't approach or couldn't come to Caritas. And that is the last step, is the integration before in their home country, after being in Lebanon or after suffering from any kind of of racism, xenophobia, or discrimination. There is a kind of reintegration before their travel in order to be safe and to go back safe in their home country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joyce. We go to Mr. Dr. Herail Cebejian, who will be talking about the racist attitudes in the United Arab Emirates. Dr. Cebejian is the General Secretary of the Bible Society in the Gulf. He holds a BBA degree in Business Administration from Haigazian University, a master's degree of Agricultural Economics from American University of Beirut, and doctor in the Ministry of Bible Engagement from New York Theological Seminary. Dr. Cebejian is the author of The Armenian Path for Struggle and Existence, The Armenian Diaspora Lives as I Saw Them, and Bible Engagement, The Discovery of Faith, Hope, and Self. He has also contributed to the number of biblical and theological articles in Christian encyclopedias and the Ambassador of Motherland Medal from Ministry of Diaspora of the Republic of Armenia. I would kindly ask all of you to squeeze yourselves in the time that is allocated for you. So the time is about 40 minutes.
Thank you very much, Seta.
Maximum.
Yeah, I can understand. Thank you very much, Seta. The connection looks to be a bit challenged, but let us try our best. With your permission, Seta, may I say, give an overall view about the migrant situation in the whole Gulf region, the GCC countries, rather than only focusing one of them, even though the Emirates has a big number of migrant workers. But let's try to highlight the migrant situation in the whole Gulf region, Arabian Gulf or Persian Gulf, in the 6 countries of the GCC. Let me first start after the discovery of oil in these countries. Of course, too many opportunities opened up for the whole region, and this also eventually led to the need of labor force. It first started, the labor force started first from the so-called the Arab world, but later on with in the 80s, especially in the 80s, it moved to the Asian subcontinent. Of course, statistics is always a challenge or an issue as to the correctness of the total number of migrant workers that we have. But according to some census, the total population in these countries is around 51 million in the whole GCC countries, out of which around 25 million are expatriates. When I say expatriates, it's not necessarily migrants. It's people of different caliber, doctors, engineers, professionals, but of course, including also migrant workers. And that's how we usually classify in our region. Expatriates are the so-called the professionals. As I said, doctors, engineers, nurses, accountants, teachers, university professors, name it. And the rest, we call them the migrant workers. In the embassies, we usually refer to them as blue-collared workers and white-collared workers. Out of the 25 million foreigners or expatriates, as we say it, according to the non-official statistics, around 15 million are migrant workers. Now, these people, the majority are coming from the Asian continent and particularly from India. And especially the Andhra Pradesh region, which they speak Telugu. This is the region in India which really sends a lot of laborers. We do have a big number also from Philippines and Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh and from Pakistan. From Africa, we do have a big number of Ethiopians, in particular women. They come as maids, also Egyptian migrant workers. So as you could see, we have a big number coming from Asian side and from the African side who come as both migrant laborers and as domestic workers. Now, whenever they come, as my colleague from Lebanon said, I mean, we do have this kafil system, of course. Whenever these people come from their home to these countries, their passport is taken because they need to come under the sponsorship of a person, of a company that really is. So their passport is being taken. And then they started working in different places. We do have a big number of them working in construction sites. They work in petrol stations. They work in cleaning the streets. They work in different kinds of this kind of, and women, of course, we do have a big number of women also who work as housemaids in the houses. Now, let's start with the salaries. The salaries, it ranges from $100 US dollars a month to $200. That's how it is. And of course, part of the salary they need to eat while they are living there, and another part of it they need to send it back home, because these people, they all come alone. They leave their families back home because, as according to the regulations in the GCC, you need to be of a certain status, both in terms of your salary and in terms of your position, to enable you to bring your family with you. So these migrant workers cannot bring their families with them. So that's where it is. And then, of course, once every 2 years they need to go back home, and not all the time this has been respected. And I still want to mention that even their salaries, that low salaries that I indicated, whether or not they cash it at the right time, there are no unions that will really support the rights of these people. There is no medical insurance as such, so if something happens, that's also for their own destiny. Now, they are provided with accommodation, and the accommodation that they are provided is what we call the labor camps. These are special sites which is outside the cities in each of these places, where there are special buildings which has been built so that all these migrant workers will live there. And they are all small rooms, one next to the to other, where 4 or 5 people are staying in these small rooms with very primitive facilities, both hygienic and other. Not too many toilet facilities, not too many kitchenette. So that's the place where they live. And early in the morning, from 7 o'clock, they take them by buses to their to their workplaces, and then in the evening they come back home. Just going into these labor camps and just trying to see the way that these people really live there, you can see the miserable life in which these people are really living in that situation. As I said, there are no unions which protect their lives. As for their rights, as for the ladies who work as housemaids, there we have a lot of challenges. We have so many cases of abuse, both physical and psychological, and of different kinds. A number of them, they just cannot take the situation anymore, so they run away. When they run away from their homes, there is no passport. The only place that they seek refuge is the so-called the safe houses. The safe houses are the special places which are built by the embassies, where they seek refuge until such a time where their case will be studied, a new passport will be issued, some money will be raised so that they will be sent back home. And of course, among these maids, among women, we have so many cases. After the abuse, some are in a pregnant situation, so they don't know what to do with it. We do have an increasing number of suicide cases because they just cannot take it anymore, the situation in which they are living. So we also follow the suicide cases with the statistics that has been provided by the embassies. I mean, a number of cases have been recorded even in the local papers about the migrant workers that committed suicide. Of course, a big number of these migrant workers are illiterates. They hardly know how to read and write. Some of them completely illiterate. So in that sense, also it doesn't also help in this respect. So of course, we do have so many issues, psychological issues like loneliness, like depression. Because of the situation in which they are living in, the condition in which they are living in, they just cannot take it. So they go into a lot of psychological disturbances, and that also eventually can lead into suicide cases. So of course, there is no citizenship right. I mean, it goes without saying, just like my colleague from Lebanon said. I mean, when these people come, it's only for an employment. If your visa is over, then you need to leave, or you need to find another sponsor so that you can continue working there. I mean, what is really crucial to see is the lives of these people, but more than that, these people already are carrying a baggage of problem from their homes. I mean, even though a good number of them do not really know where they are ending up, because as again my colleague in Lebanon said, they don't know the kind of a situation they will end up with. And this is where the sponsors or the agencies also play a role in it. They just promise them a good job, a good thing, and so when by the time they land to these countries, they end up in a completely different situation. So these people, imagine how desperate they are in their own situation back home, that they are really seeking for a position to come to the Gulf, even with a salary of $200, $100, $150 or $200. But that is quite a lot of money, imagine, for them. So they want to come to the Gulf to this situation. So carrying their own problems from back home and coming and ending up to a new problematic situation in the Gulf, you can imagine the kind of a situation they will end up with. So in many ways, the church and organization like ours, like the Bible Society, is like a haven for these people, because whenever they have a problem, that's the place where they usually come in order to seek for help, for assistance. And this is where a number of the parachurch organizations really work among these communities in order to see how best we can help them. There's quite a lot of advocacy campaigns taking place all around the world when it comes to the situation of migrant workers in our part of the world, in the Gulf. But that's how it is, the situation, and I'm not sure if I passed my 10-minute SETA or I still have.
Yes, you have crossed the red line, Hadaif. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's how it is.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hadaif.
Thank you.
And we will give the opportunity to the participants to ask their questions. Maybe through the questions you can answer more to what you had to say already. So the floor is to the participants. Yusuf?
Yes, actually, we had a question while during Joyce's intervention. The question came from Jack asking about the nationality of migrant workers who are experiencing these problems. Does it include Filipinos? And we might also add if these numbers or these cases take into account also Palestinian workers or Syrian migrants workers. Was it clear?
Yes.
Yeah.
If we want to talk about racism and xenophobia, it's more than, if we can say, it's more than contract or it's more than recruitment. It's a process, and it's how we look at migrant domestic workers. This is the point. How families look at these persons, how they are treating them, and what they are considering them. They are inferior. They have other skin color. They have other culture. Maybe Filipino ladies, they don't face as much because they have a contract. Their embassy, they have a specific contract for them with a minimum wage. Problem, they are not facing this problem maybe from the financial side, if they are paid on time and they are, all the conditions are here. What other nationalities we have? Sure, from Asia, Sri Lankan, Bangladesh, Ethiopian, from Africa. We have few from Nepal, and Armenia. We have, sure, from Africa, we have from Togo, from other countries, but these are the main nationalities that they are facing this kind of, you can say, racism or discrimination.
How about the Syrian employees? Are they undergoing, how shall I say, a discrimination? I think that is entirely another sector. Yes, yes, Joyce, please.
Discrimination for Syrians. Be frank, Syrian issue, Syrian crisis is more political. It's not really. It's not similar. It's not similar to the situation of migrant domestic workers. So it's more political. It's more. It's more oriented to if they are going to get the citizenship in Lebanon. How are we going to if they are taking work of Lebanese, replacing Lebanese in their work? So it's not. It's another kind of not discrimination. It's another kind of problematic. It's more political. There is no discrimination related to racism, if we can say, because racism is related to color, to skin color. It's related more to based on biological difference, while the xenophobia is more cultural. I cannot be categoric for regarding the Syrian situation because it's not similar to migrant domestic workers.
Thank you, Joyce.
It's more political.
Thank you very much, Joyce. Yusuf, another question?
None at the moment.
Not at the moment. Okay, we can move to the second speakers, to the second division of our how should I say, racism in the Middle East, which is the Palestinian issue. We will take Dr. Bernard Sabella and Rifat Assis. Dr. Bernard Sabella will be talking about Palestinians in general in the region, while Dr. Rifat Assis will be talking about Palestinians in the occupied territories. I will present Dr. Bernard Sabella, who earned his PhD in sociology at the University of Virginia. He currently serves as the Executive Secretary of the Department of Service to Palestinian Refugees, the SPR, of the Middle East Council of Churches. A former professor of sociology at Bethlehem University, with research focused on the presence of Palestinian Christians and interreligious relations in the Middle East. He served as a member of Palestinian Parliament between 2006 and 2019, during which time he headed the Palestinian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The floor is yours, Dr. Sabella.
Well, good afternoon, all of you. I hope you hear me right. There is no problem with the sound. When we talk about Palestinian refugees in general, the main theme or topic that we all insist on is the exercise of the right of return, which is according to UN resolutions of 1948, General Assembly resolution. Now, one of the problems we are having with the exercise of the right of return is that recently, you all know that the Trump administration decided that there is no such thing as Palestinian refugees. And out of the 5.5 million Palestinian refugees that exist throughout the Middle East, the Trump administration ingeniously came down to 39,000 Palestinian refugees. That included inflating me because I was then a young boy, so inflating the numbers to 39,000. Now this poses a serious, in my opinion, a serious living condition issue to Palestinian refugees throughout the Middle East, because UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which was established by the UN in 1950, is taking care of Palestinian refugees in over 60 refugee camps throughout the Middle East, including a couple also which are unrecognized camps, like the Gaza camp in Jordan. Now, what are the conditions of life for Palestinian refugees outside the occupied territories? Because I know my colleague Rifat will be addressing that. Basically, I would go to Lebanon first. There, we have encountered a religious, socio-economic issue with Palestinian refugees. The sensitivity to Palestinian refugees in Lebanon was basically because most Palestinian refugees who arrived in the country after 1948 were Muslims. And the Lebanese Christians were really worried that this would tilt the balance, the demographic balance, in favor of the Muslims. In any case, it tilted throughout, since then. And it tilted not because of the presence of Palestinian Muslim refugees, but basically because of demographics, populations dynamic, and it's not the place to discuss these. Now, our problem is that Palestinian refugees in Lebanon are not allowed to work in over 70 occupations. And that is a problem. Why? Because if I am a Palestinian and having gotten a medicine degree from even Harvard or other universities in the US or Europe or even in the Arab world, in Lebanon itself, I'm not allowed to work because I'm a Palestinian refugee. I don't have citizenship. So that's a problem. Even though some friends in Lebanon tell me that the situation has improved a little since the national authority in Palestine has insisted to get the Palestinians out of internal Lebanese politics. And I think they have succeeded at that, but still this sensitivity exists. And the laws, the labor laws, not allowing Palestinian refugees really to work in Lebanon, it remains a problem. Now, there is also this imagined solution for Lebanon's problems by having the Palestinian and other refugees in Lebanon, especially the Syrians, out of the country. If you get them out of the country, then hallelujah, praise the Lord, Lebanon would be at their best. I think this is very simplistic. And therefore, this also leads into this problem of seeing the Palestinians as a burden, Palestinian refugees as a burden on Lebanese composition, societal composition, and even the Lebanese economy. The counter argument to that certainly is that if you make the Palestinian refugees better economically, then they are more likely, really, in the long run, to exercise the right of return. If they remain poor and unemployed, it would be more difficult. Anyhow, I'm not going to go into that. Now, if we go to Syria, we have a problem there in the sense that the civil strife in Syria, or the civil war, or whatever you want to call it, since 2011, has led to to a new exodus for Palestinian refugees, where you have over 100,000 Palestinian refugees from Syria who ended up either in Lebanon, mostly, and in Jordan. And this reflects the rather unstable and unpredictable conditions of life in which Palestinian refugees continuously live in. And this reminds me of what happened to the Palestinians in Kuwait after Iraqi invasion of that country, where they were all deported from Kuwait. And therefore they ended up experiencing another refugee experience, the second or third, for some the fourth. And so this unstable living for Palestinian refugees is really, really quite bad. And clearly Palestinian refugees in Syria were caught in the civil strife. And that made life for them even worse. One other thing is, if we go to Jordan, then you have a problem there that if you speak of unemployment rate in Jordan, generally speaking, especially among young people, at 25%, you can easily predict that the unemployment rate among young Palestinian refugees in refugee camps in Jordan would come close to 40%, if not more. So in another sense, in another way, what these figures are telling us is that if Palestinian refugees continue living in the same conditions, then they don't have hope. They don't have prospects for the future. Now, very, very shortly, because I know Rifat will be talking about that, in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip, you have almost 70% of the Gaza population refugees, almost 70%. Now, in the West Bank, it's 25%. Now, the problem there is not restricted, and I'm not going to say what Rifat would be talking about, but basically, the problem there is that in the Gaza Strip, almost 80% of the overall population, and I would say among refugees, maybe 90%, are aid dependent. So when you are aid dependent, you have a problem there. And it touches on human rights, it touches on basic rights, it touches on housing, and on all areas of life. Now, the problem with unemployment in the Gaza Strip, and to an extent in the West Bank, is really the continuing Israeli occupation. What do we do? How do we deal with these things? Now, Seta, you mentioned that I work for the Department of Service to Palestinian Refugees of the Middle East Council of Churches, and we have been trying modestly. I mean, we don't pretend great things, great achievements, but we have been trying very, very hard to reach out to refugee communities, especially in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in order to ease the conditions for some of the people. But we remain limited in our work. I think I will go back to where I started with, and I will end here. We have a big problem with the present Trump administration in the USA. It has just put the Palestinian perspective into the freezer. There is no such thing for the Trump administration as the Palestinian perspective. Who are these Palestinians, you know? What are they talking about? And therefore, my worry is that if the Trump administration continues another 4 years, then we are going to see a deterioration, especially with the decision of the US to cut aid to UNRWA. They used to give UNRWA some $350 million a year, and then they decided, no, we would stop that. So what do you do with close to 30,000 teachers who teach at UNRWA school? What do you do with the living conditions of Palestinian refugees? throughout the region? What do you do with young Palestinian refugees, children, women, and we all talk about women empowerment if this continues? Yes, UNRWA is trying to balance things and to manage things, but unfortunately, this decision by the Trump administration has really made it very, very painful for average Palestinians. And I'm not talking about other Palestinians, but the average refugee Palestinian living in camps has been hard hit by this decision. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. My heart breaks to stop you all while you are speaking, but sometimes you have to look into my eyes so that you will understand that the time is up. Now we come to the second part of the Palestinian plight, racist attitude towards the Palestinians, whereby we will be talking about the Palestinians in the occupied territories. And this will be presented by Mr. Rifat Assis, who has long been active in the Palestinian struggle on a number of non-violent fronts and has over 30 years of experience working in the Middle East, Northern Caucasus, Central Asia, and Europe. He was the executive director of the YMCA Palestine and founder of YMCA Joint Advocacy Initiative and the Olive Tree Campaign. He also worked as the manager of WCC-CCIA. He founded the national section of the Global Child Rights Movement, Defense for Children International, and was elected international president for 2 terms. He co-founded the Alternative Tourism Group, focused on justice tourism to Palestine, and was a co-author of Kairos Palestine and its coordinator since its inception in 2009. He published 2 books, Palestine, A Bleeding Wound in the World's Conscience, and Kairos for Palestine, and he contributed to 16 different books in different languages. Mr. Rifat Assis, the floor is yours. Please respect the time.
Thank you, Sita. I will do my best. And since we are under time limitations, I will go immediately into the topic. I believe if you want to talk about Israel-Palestine discrimination, racism, we need to go to 1948. The 1948 is the year when Israel was established. And Israel, and since its establishment, it classifies its citizens according to ethnicity or religion, and usually privileges one group over all others. Today, there is a de facto caste system within the territories that Israel controls between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. At the top are Israeli Jews, while Muslim and Christians, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza are at the bottom. Between them are Palestinian citizens of Israel and Palestinian residents of occupied East Jerusalem. Each has different rights according to the regime Israel has implemented, with Jews enjoying the full benefits of democracy in a Jewish state, and Palestinians living in the occupied West Bank and Gaza accorded no political rights whatsoever, being ruled by a brutal Israeli military decrees. Since 1948, Palestinians who remained inside Israel have been exposed to unfair laws, budgeting, planning, land confiscation, and political suppression. There are today, according to some Israeli human rights organizations like Adalah, for instance, they talk about more than 60 laws that discriminate against them directly or indirectly, rendering them second or third or even fourth class citizens in their own homeland. Israel, when it was established, they introduced a law which they call it the absentee property law, which was, I think it was ratified in 1950, to seize land and property. Palestinian citizens of Israel today face significant legal obstacles in gaining access to this land for agriculture, residence, or commercial development. with more than 70 Palestinian villages and communities in Israel, are unrecognized by the government. And this means that they do not receive any kind of service and are not even listed on official maps. Since Israel founding, and this is just to give you an example, in 1948, more than 600 Jewish municipalities have been established, while not a single new Arab town or community has been recognized by the State of Israel. And recently, as you all know, Israel passed what they call it, a basic law, the nation state of the Jewish people, which is effectively declared Israel as an apartheid state. This law, which came into force in 2018, defines Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, constitutionally entrenching inequality and discrimination against non-Jews. The law grants the right to self-determination exclusively to Jews, establishes that immigration leading to automatic citizenship is exclusive to Jews, which means Jews, they can be Israeli, but not Palestinians, for instance. And they also promotes the building of Jewish settlement and downgrades the status of Arabic language as official language, among other features of this law. If we want to talk about territories occupied in 1967, according to Human Rights Watch, and here I want to quote Human Rights Watch in one of its reports, they said, Palestinians face systematic discrimination merely because of their race, ethnicity, and national origin, depriving them of electricity, water, schools, and access to roads, while nearby Jewish settlers enjoy all of these state-provided benefits. While Israeli settlements flourish, Palestinians under Israeli control live in a time warp, not just separate, not just unequal, but sometimes even pushed off their lands, out of their homes, and end quote. Palestinians in general in the occupied territory are restricted in their right to work through Israeli policies that severely curtail Palestinian agriculture and industry in the occupied territories. You know, we cannot do any kind of exports or imports without their permits. And of course, this impairs access to agricultural land and travel for employment and business. The problem in Palestine with these settlements that they confiscate the land, and the land is the main source of living for many Palestinians. Restrictions on the Palestinian right to freedom of movement. This is also an endemic in the West Bank as a result of Israel's control and installment of checkpoints, roadblocks, and crossings. Today, we have more or around 600 checkpoints which divide lands within the state of Palestine itself. It is a matrix of separate roads, obstructive and all-encompassing permits with ID system that applies solely to Palestinians, which means you need to go through checking and security checking, etc. Moreover, the nationality and entry into Israel law, this is also another law, it is a racist law, prevents Palestinians from the occupied territories who are married to Palestinian citizens in Israel from gaining residency of citizenship, which means this law forces thousands of Palestinians living in the West Bank from getting united with their spouse living inside Israel. Again, the right of Palestinians to education, although, I mean, Israel does not operate the school system in the occupied Palestinian territory, but education is severely embedded by military role. And this is due to sometimes military actions near schools, extensive school closures, direct attacks on school, severe restrictions on movements and arrest and detention of teachers and students, invasion of schools, or etc. The settlers living in the West Bank, on settlements inside the West Bank, these settlers, although they live in the West Bank, but they live, of course, in Israeli-only settlements, they are governed by the Israeli civil law, driving an Israeli-only road system, two kinds of roads, and benefit greatly from the enormous sum of public money spent on entrenching, defending, and expanding the settlements. So we live nearby, but they enjoy, I mean, different privileges, also water, spaces, everything. On the other hand, seizure of land for settlement building and expansion has resulted in shrinking space available for the Palestinians. So we are unable, for instance, in Bethlehem, just to give you an example, today the Palestinians, we control maybe less than 12% from our land. And we are around 200,000 people, and we have around 100, maybe 50,000 Jewish settlers, and they enjoy control over around 90% from the land. Of course, we should not forget the separation wall, the annexation wall, because this is a wall of 700 kilometers, and this is, I mean, the route of this wall, determined by the location of many Israeli settlements in the West Bank, creates a de facto annexation of most of the settlements, natural resources, including water reservoir, thereby expanding its borders by seizing thousands of dunums of land and cutting off tens of thousands of Palestinians holding Jerusalem ID cards. This is, I mean, it has a devastating impact on individual, the collective human rights of Palestinians. It violates, among others, Palestinian advocate standard of living and abstracts them from accessing basic services, whether it was in health or in education. In East Jerusalem, to give you just another example, while 40% of the population of the city of Jerusalem are Palestinians, only 13% of the land in Jerusalem is designated for Palestinian housing. Israel uses planning and building laws to restrict Palestinian development inside Jerusalem. Of course, I mean, more than 100,000 Palestinians today, they have no housing permit in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is really a sad, very sad story, I would say. In addition to this, Israeli authorities can revoke their residency permit, because the Jerusalemites in Jerusalem, they have what they call a residency permit. And they can revoke the residency permit if they travel abroad for a long time, for instance, without renewing their, laissez-passer, call it, or passport, or the residency permit. Also, if they are unable to prove that their center life is in Jerusalem, which means if you are a Jerusalemite living in Jerusalem but working in the West Bank, this could be a reason to revoke your ID. And vice versa. If you live in the West Bank and work in Jerusalem, again, your center life is in Jerusalem, and they can revoke your residency permit. Since 1967 till today, they managed to revoke more than 15,000 Palestinians from East Jerusalem. And when we say 15,000 Palestinians, we mean 15,000 families. Yeah? Because if someone his residency permit is revoked, the whole family will be affected. In Gaza, Gaza is under siege for the past 12 years. Gaza, it was all the time denied development, and it was all the time under humanitarian crisis. Several wars were launched against the Gazans, devastated everything. Today, I mean, many people are displaced, homeless, because their homes were demolished. Many of them, they're still living in schools, in UNRWA premises, etc. And of course, everything also was affected in Gaza. Dr. Bernard spoke about the unemployment rate, but also we can talk about the access to healthcare, access to education, access to, I mean, even if you want to continue your study abroad, you will be subject to travel restrictions. And I think that the worst thing now happening to Gaza is the cut in electricity and water. And there are many reports says that Gaza will be soon unlivable, because a lot of, I mean, 95% of its land, if it's water, it's polluted and not drinkable. So Gaza is, I mean, in addition to all this, the killing and injuring of people, it's on daily basis. Even the Great March of Return, which is largely peaceful, tens of people were killed and thousands of people were also injured. Access to food also.
Time is up, Rifat. I know the journey like this one is a never-ending story, but
no
we
problem.
will give the opportunity to the participants to raise questions so that through the questions we will be answering. Thank you very much, Rifat.
You're welcome.
Yusuf, are there questions?
Yes, actually, I will start with questions who came late for the first two speakers, and I will try to pinpoint much the questions in a way so that they are answered quickly. First question: do Lebanese Christians discriminate against Muslims immigrants from other Asian countries? I think Joyce can answer this. And the second question related to, of course, discrimination, all types of discrimination in Lebanon or in the Gulf, in the Middle East as a whole. Are there strategies? I think Joyce mentioned some of these strategies by Caritas Lebanon, but is there any strategies, for example, for Middle East Council of Churches or coming from Middle East organizations and governments towards limiting or overcoming discrimination in the Middle East? I will wait for some answers until I can relay the other questions for Rifat and Dr. Bernard.
Joyce, please.
Yes, if I may. So for the discrimination from Christian to migrant workers, Muslim migrant workers, maybe it was happening in the past, but due to conflict and to this discrimination itself, really employers are now asking recruitment agencies to have a migrant workers from their own religion. If they are Muslims, they are asking for a Muslim migrant worker. If Christian, for a Christian one. This discrimination on religion issue is still, but not on the same level, on the same high level as the past 10 years. So because they are more aware of this, and to avoid the problems of praying on or religion issue, wearing a scarf or whatever, so they are asking for the religion before recruitment. This is for the discrimination on the religious issue. And the second question is for, because I couldn't hear well.
What are the churches doing?
If there are strategies towards limiting discrimination in the Middle East as a whole, are there strategies by organizations, by NGOs, by governments?
Yes, for Caritas, I just not to repeat. I talk about the steps that are the practical steps regarding the recruitment, if we can say the recruitment process, or the travel of the migrant workers, starting from her home of origin till coming back to her country of origin. So the whole process is covered by Caritas, like the linguistic guide, like the training from the starting from the country of origin, like rehabilitation if they are victim or subject of any mistreatment or any discrimination. Much more for the legal service inside Caritas. If the migrant worker wishes to come back home and she sues her sponsor or her employer for non-payment of salary, she can assign a lawyer. He can represent her while she's abroad, when she's back home, and then the indemnity or the compensation can be sent back to her can be sent back to her, and we have many cases that the amounts collected from the court, from the judgment, and from the sponsors are sent to the migrant worker in order to avoid her stay in the country, either in an illegal way because she overstayed her residency, or to avoid as well the conflict or the conflict between the migrant worker and her employer.
Yusuf, I can add from the side of MECC that advocacy initiatives have been taking place for the past many years concerning the rights of the migrants as well as the change in labor laws.
Yeah. Thank you. The other question for Dr. Bernard and Rifat is coming from Peter Macari, asking about the separation policy of Israel from the separation wall to all these kind of blockades around Gaza and so on. How does it affect?
I had something to add on the first one.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, because with Yusuf, I mean, concerning what you said about discrimination and so on, if I may add something from our experience.
Please.
It's just that
Yes,
in our situation in the Gulf, the majority of the migrant workers that come are non-Christians to start with. Okay, so in that sense, there is no discrimination when it comes to the religious affiliation. And just for you to know, the majority are either Hindu or Buddhist, and of course some Muslims, and a smaller proportion of them are Christians. So the religion, ethnicity, it's not, it doesn't have a say in the discrimination. So they are all discriminated as migrant workers. When it comes to the advocacy work, the countries who are sending the migrant workers are taking certain initiatives, and especially the Philippine government, for example, they send a lot of migrant workers also, so they are taking some initiatives. The Ethiopian government is also taking some initiatives, especially when it comes to the maids. But it's still not to the extent that will really improve a lot. There is quite a lot of advocacy work that is taking place both on behalf of the churches and also from the NGOs, which is really also pushing the local authorities in order to improve the situation on ground. We have seen certain measures of change taking place, but it's still not to the required level. So that's all I can say about our part of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, Yusuf.
Back again to the question to Dr. Bernard and Rifat. With the wall and the separation policy and the blockade around Gaza, has it increased racism, xenophobia for the Israelis against the Palestinians, and vice versa? What is the attitude of the Palestinians towards these policies towards Israelis?
You want me to go first, Dr. Bernard?
Yes, Rifat, please.
I think Peter's questions about the human contact and if this also plays a role or not, because now we do not have really human contact. But for me, human contact needs to be first on equal footing. And most of the time, this kind of contact between Palestinians and Israelis were not balanced. We were all the time the occupied, and they were all the time the occupiers. Today, I can say also, we still have human contacts because around 150,000 Palestinians, if not more, they work inside Israel. So the human contacts are there. Maybe it's not like before, but for me, the most devastating effects on this human contact, human relation, is the Israeli procedures, is the Israeli rough measures against the Palestinians. Today we have, a considerable amount of Palestinians. They just born and live under the occupation. They don't know anything else than occupation. So what kind of human contacts such a relation would produce? This is my contribution to this. Maybe Bernard Sabella has another thing.
Bernard? We cannot hear you, Bernard.
He has put mute, maybe.
Yeah. Now.
Yeah. Well, separation has also led to polarization. In a sense, separation has contributed to Israeli society become more rightist, more on the right, and living in a dreamland, really, that there is no such thing as Palestinians living next to them. Actually, they don't think that there are Arabs living next to them, contrary to the wisdom of some. I would not continue with this. But what I'm saying here is this polarization within Israeli society has really also contributed to distancing the two populations from each other. For example, nowadays, you don't find in Israel a strong left of center popular movement that would support ending Israeli occupation, as happened, let's say, in the early 80s. And this is really a loss to both Israel and Palestine, both to the Israeli occupiers and to the Palestinian occupied. Because you do need popular attention to issues dividing Israelis from Palestinians and the need to end Israeli occupation and to have the Palestinians fulfill their rights. Today, what the Israelis are talking about really is Oslo is finished, and really what the Israelis should do is annex the West Bank, starting with the Jordan Valley, and we have heard the U.S. administration, which has recently, again, unfortunately, said that the settlements are not necessarily illegal. So there is a disparity, separation, and really the insistence of Washington and Israel and the Israeli right that there is no such thing as a Palestinian state to emerge in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And this separation really is a block, a major block to any hope for a peace process restart. So we are stuck. I go once again to the freezer concept, and I think Washington really has frozen everything, and Israel is now doing whatever it wants without anyone asking questions, not even Europe. Europe is asleep, and forget the Arab world, sorry to say it, forget the Arab world in its entirety, even though there are some sympathies here and there, but basically, I am more pessimistic about the impact of the Trump administration decisions on UNRWA, on Jerusalem, and now on settlements. So we are stuck.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard, very much. I'm sorry. It's such a wide spectrum of problem that, you know, it's difficult to, how should I say, put into a few words.
Yeah, but everything, Zeta, and my colleagues, is interdependent. What happens in Jerusalem, what happens in Gaza, really affects Washington, and what happens in Washington or Berlin or London or Paris or whatever affects really the Middle East. And so everything is interdependent. And if we don't wake up to this reality, then we remain stuck.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Rifat. We go now to our last speaker, Mena Shawki, who will be talking about racism against the Christian populations in Egypt. Of course, Egypt and Copts are not the only Christian population that is undergoing racism in the Middle East. There are other Christians. However, we will concentrate on this one. Mena Shawki works as a program coordinator at the Egyptian Association for Educational Resources. He is also a deacon within the Coptic Orthodox Church. He was an intern at the Commission of Churches on International Affairs of the World Council of Churches in 2013. He has a legal background and worked as a lawyer in Egypt. He currently serves as vice moderator of ECOS, the WCC Commission on Youth Engagement in the Ecumenical Movement. The floor is yours, Mena. We have 7 minutes and we will have another 7 minutes for the discussion. Please.
Okay, I will keep my eyes on the time. Thank you, Mr. for this introduction. Thank you again for coordinating all of this. Is my voice clear now?
Is it okay now?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. First, I will start with a brief introduction about what is the discrimination about the Copts in Egypt historically. First, the Christians in Egypt, or the Copts, where we prefer to be called the Copts of Egypt. We are not like to be called a minority, because we are not a minority in Egypt. There is no official percentage of the Egyptian or the Copts percentage of the population of the Christians in Egypt right now. There is no official, and we don't know why. All of the most of the numbers are in the websites are by some organizations, but not from the government itself. This is just one point that I wanted to highlight before we start. Persecution for the Copts in history started with the founding of the Coptic Church by St. Mark after Jesus Christ, and it started with the Roman empires, which led to start of the Saints calendar, which is the working calendar in the Coptic Church right now. We have a calendar, it's called the Saints calendar. So because we had a lot of persecution in the Roman empires, so we had this calendar we are working with it right now. Then we can go to the Islamic era, where the Copts had a huge discrimination and persecution in this era. I will just highlight some of the points that Copts faced in the Islamic era that emphasize what was happening in this era. The Copts were prohibited from riding the horses or the donkeys in the streets when or where the Muslims are walking or don't have the horses or donkeys. So the Christians cannot have horses or donkeys carrying to the Muslims. The second point is they cannot be seated in the streets where the Muslims are walking. So if they see a Muslim man walking, they cannot be seated in front of him. Or
can you speak a bit louder? A bit louder, please.
Okay, I'll try to be louder. And then the fourth point is that we have for the Copts in Egypt, we have some a cross inked to our wrists, like this one, if you can see it. Or maybe if you know someone from Egypt, most of us have this cross wrist inked in our wrists. That shows that we had this persecution in this era of the Islamic era. So we have this cross inked to our wrists, or maybe in our faces, so that the parents of any children, if they are just passed away or they were killed by the Muslims, they know that the kids or the sons or the daughters are Christians, so they cannot be converted. This is some point of what happened in the Islamic era that emphasized the persecution in the history. And now then I will talk about the modern era of the persecution or the violence against the Copts in Egypt. Since 1970, there are more than like hundreds of incidents of attacking to the Copts and to the churches and to the Christian religious institutes in Egypt. I will not go through them, of course, they are all online, but I just wanted to highlight that it's more than 100 incidents since 1970. And then from 2011, when the revolution happened, till now, there are like more than 50 incidents about killings and bombings across Egypt in front of Egyptian churches. Why is this happening? This is happening because of some places or some churches, the Christians or the Copts in any area or some area, they are trying to pray in one place, but they cannot have a legalized building for a church. So they are just gathering themselves and praying in one place together. So when the Muslims or the neighborhood know about them praying in this area, so they just go and start to attack them or harass them. And then some others are just bombing because they want to terrify the Christians in Egypt. Because the Christians, after the revolution, the second revolution, of course, we know that Pope Tawadros, the patriarch of the Coptic Church, he showed, or he was with President El-Sisi in this image, having all of the leaders together against the Muslim Brotherhood. So most of the attackers, they just attack the churches because of this image. Some other allegations that churches have weapons or have hiding girls hiding because of the transformation of the religions. So there's a lot of allegations of this incident that also happen to have the killings or the bombings inside the churches. This is for the persecution in the history or in the modern era. And why is this happening? Just briefing again because of the time about the discrimination that Copts are facing now in Egypt. Some positions in the security departments, like the general intelligence or the military intelligence, they are prohibited to have a Coptic in it. Also, the discrimination in the academic positions, there are like few number of the Copts in academic higher institutions in Egypt or the universities in Egypt, and they are prohibited to just go and apply for any position like a professor or a dean in the government universities. Also in the sports, in the football team, which is the soccer team, some people say soccer, some people say football. This is the most popular sport in Egypt. So in the national team, in the past half century, there's only 6 players joined the national team or played in the top tier clubs, which were Copts. So and most of the
Mena, we cannot hear you. Mena, we cannot hear you. The connection is, there is no connection. Yusuf? Segma?
Yeah, we can't hear Mena anymore.
We cannot hear you.
Everything is clear, but we can't hear him anymore.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
We cannot hear you. Can you hear us? Do you hear us,
No,
Mena?
he doesn't. No, he doesn't.
I can hear you, Seta, but I cannot hear Mena. Seta, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We all can hear you, but we cannot hear Mina. I think
Mena.
also he's not hearing us.
Okay, until the connection is fine, Segma, can we take another, how should I say, intervention or as a question? Mena?
Sure, absolutely. I think until this technical issue is resolved, maybe we can take one more question that is in the chat room. And yeah, and if you as moderator will allow us, we can maybe extend the conversation for another 5-10 minutes maximum.
Please.
I have to leave, Sigma.
Oh.
Unfortunately, I need to bring my grandson now.
Is the question addressed to Rifat?
No, actually, to Mina, the questions.
No, I have 3 questions to Mena now.
Yeah.
Can you speak now, Mena?
Mena, do you hear us?
I can hear you, and
So
you
he's
can
back.
hear me now.
Please go on. Please go on, and then we will take the 2 questions from the floor. Very good. Mena, go
Okay.
on.
I just have 2 more points to cover. We covered the point of the sports discrimination about the Copts, and also among 35 cabinet in the ministries, we have just one Coptic ministry or woman, Christian woman. It's called Nabila Makram. Miss Nabila Makram is the only Coptic minister in this cabinet right now. So I just went through all of these points together just to be more brief as I can because of the time limit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mena. We take immediately 1 or 2 questions, and then we will try to wrap up.
Okay, Mena, please bear with me.
Yeah.
To what extent does Christianity have influence in Egyptian society? And you have mentioned some. Who are the groups, if there are a specific group that are being more violent to Christians in Egypt? Another question, do the churches have a unified presence like a Christian council or a church council? How do or they create a unified presence of peaceful resistance? You want me to repeat?
No, I heard both of them. I'm just writing them down, not to forget them. Okay, can I go, Ms. Seta?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. I will answer the second question, which was you were asking about the peaceful resettlement of the peaceful resolutions that the church is doing right now to face this attacks, right?
Yes.
Okay. Our Pope Tawadros in his interviews and in his media press, he said that we cannot face, or we cannot have this attacking by another attack on our sisters and brothers from the Muslim faith, but we can just let all the churches being attacked or bombed, and then we will go and pray in the mosques. He is so peaceful about these attacks or about these bombings or incidents. Actually, most of the Copts, they may not like his attitude, but and also in comparing his attitude or reactions with the former patriarch Bob Shenouda, the former one was like more attacking the government, and that was not okay for some instance. Sometimes also he was just going to the ministry, to the monastery, and is just staying there for 1 week or 2 weeks. That means, or giving a message that I'm not talking about this incident until you resolve it. So the church is not, they just like having this peaceful march, or not talking about some incidents, which is not so good. This is for the second question. The first question, for the groups of the attackers, the groups of the attackers are different, from the extremist Muslim to the Muslim Brotherhood to the Salafis. So from time to time, there are some groups are attacking the churches, and the major attacking of the churches or the bombings, they are just belongs to the ISIS or to the these terrorist groups. So we have the terrorist groups from outside or having the bombings, or we have the Muslim extremists from inside who are just attacking the church with the bottles or rocks or something like this. So the groups or of the attackers are different and from incident to incident. I think there's some missing question. Can you say it again?
We cannot hear you, Yusuf.
It's good now.
Yeah, I just want to clarify one point you just mentioned. When you are talking about some attacks coming from Muslim extremists from inside, what do you mean? Why do you mean by Egypt, or from the same neighborhood?
Yeah, from the same neighborhood. There are in the Upper Egypt, not in the major cities like Cairo or Alexandria. Let's say in Elminia. Elminia is a small, not as very small, but it's in Upper Egypt, which has the most Christian popularity. There are some extremists living inside this city. So if they know that there is a building, it will be transferred to a church, so they can just go and attack it in front of the police officers, and no one can just attack them or stop them. And if the Christians are just like stopping them or trying to have this the street wars with them, the police can just go and arrest some of the Christians and some of the Muslims together, just to end this what is happening.
Yeah, thank you, Mena. I think the first question, which was a general question, you have touched on through your input earlier. There are another two requests, actually. One question for WCC on overall Palestine-Israel policy, and another concerns from one of the our visitors and guests, Solomon David. If he might come raise some concerns over immigrant workers in Gulf countries. I don't know if we have the time for that.
We only are left with 7 minutes. If Solomon David can say only in 1.5 minutes, then we can continue with our participants, because they have to have their messages in one word, in one sentence. So please, David, can you say it in 1.5 minutes?
Yes, definitely. Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well.
Okay, my name is Solomon David. I've been in Dubai last for the 25 years time. I've been actively working with the churches over there. We have been, Joyce has mentioned about, everybody has mentioned about the Gulf expats, the migrants, and WCC, we have already done few papers work. Last for the 5 years time or 10 years time, substantial changes has been done in UAE, like they started the wage protection system, now the visa system, and each community like Indian or Filipinos and all these, most of the major expat community have their own shelter houses to deal with the issues and everything. Now the police as well as other agencies are working hard to regulate it. And I have been in Oman also these days, and almost similar arrangements has been done. Saudi Arabia, it's not very sure about it because it's not been open very much. But Bahrain is coming up. Kuwait has not been opened on it. Compared to the highest number of migrants are in UAE and Saudi Arabia, UAE has been doing very well. My question is to have the discussion on it. There are plenty of churches out here, Christian communities are here. What are we going to do with the migrant workers, specifically the Christian people or non-Christian people who is already here in this part of the, what will be the churches are doing, will be able to do it? Can we have a unified approach to support the migrants here or not? Or we have a plan to be addressed on it?
That's my question on it.
Sita, yeah, I can. Do I have time to respond to the brother's question or what?
30 seconds, Harai.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I can see his concern, and throughout the years, and Sita, you are very much aware of the developments. We tried very hard in order to bring the churches together. Fortunately, Brother Solomon, we initiated what we call Gulf Fellowship of Christian Churches, and we try to bring the churches together in order to see what are the common issues that are challenging us. So we are trying to tackle these issues on the migrant issues also on the church agenda. But having said that, we still haven't reached to the level where a unified strategy or a program need to be implemented on the church side in the Gulf in order to show how we tackle. There are certain efforts done by certain churches. We talk about it on the Gulf Fellowship of Churches meetings once every year that we have. But we need to do a little bit more on an overall church strategy. Having said that, when it comes to the openness to the yes, especially in the UAE, we can see that. But when you still go into the labor camps, Brother Solomon, I think it needs still more improvement needs to be done. Thank you very much. 30 seconds.
Definitely. So what will be the WCC or MECC role in this regard to give us the correct guideline to have a unified approach to support our migrant workers and people around? We need to have some sort of a plan, which I can also give you my input on it.
I'm sorry, time is up. The last question goes to Yusuf, is if there are any other pending questions. Otherwise, I will thank all of the speakers and ask them to say in one word what message they have through this webinar to the world concerning their plight as migrant workers, as Palestinians, as Christians, what their message will be concerning advocating the racism that they are undergoing. We start with Rifat, if Rifat is still there, because he was on fire.
Yeah. Yes, I think.
One sentence, very short one, Rifat.
Yes. My message is that people of the world, civil society structures, the churches, they should stand by the Palestinians and exercise pressures on Israel to lift and seize its occupation and apartheid.
Thank you, Rifat. Bernard?
My last sentence is the following. Never lose hope. Learn how to love, live with dignity, and allow others to live with dignity.
Thank you very much. Joyce?
My last sentence will be looking forward for a time where employer and employee can assume arm's length principle, where both parties are equal in rights and responsibility. This is achieved, we can pass to legal frameworks, to law, to other practical steps. So arm's length principle is the most important factor in the relationship between migrant domestic workers and their employer.
Thank you, Joyce. Harai?
Yes, since this is an initiative of a WCC, so it is a church-affiliated initiative, I would like to draw to your kind attention that there is a big Christian presence in the Gulf regions, which sometimes people are really surprised to know about it. We are almost reaching to the target of 5 million Christians of different denominations. I mean, you name it, everybody is there. Yeah. So please have it in mind that there's a big Christian community down there. Moreover, there is a big expatriate migrant community who are living in different situations. According to the world statistics, the first 4 countries in the world which has the greatest number of expatriate versus the locals are in the Gulf region. UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, they have the highest percentage of expats. So we have a big number of migrant communities, and we do have a number of challenges. Even though the situation is improving, but we still have challenges, both on the Christian side and vis-a-vis the migrant situation. So please have this in your area of interest. Let me put it this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hirar. And last but not least, Mena, what's your message?
My message would be that we are the Christians in the world. We have to be united together in one prayer, that we trust God, and we trust His words that He will be with us all the time. And we have to send the peace to the world. So God of peace uses us to send His peace to the world, useless what is done to us in any part of the world. That's it.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your insightful presentations, for your energy, for your time. And I hope you will all go for the work that you are doing for the churches, for the people, and for the humankind in general. I'll give the floor and the last word to Segma, and I thank you very much, Segma, for initiating this webinar.
Thank you.
Racism in the Middle East. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your insightful presentation. It was rich. It was very rich in content, and we learned so much, all of us who are not from the region. I very much appreciate also SETA for taking the time to moderate this conversation, and Youssef for co-facilitating this webinar.
Yes,
it was really great to have all of you as speakers, moderator, co-facilitator. I'd like to acknowledge that even if this was a regional webinar, we had international participation from the Philippines, from Cameroon, from the Bahamas, from USA, from Dubai, and other places. I'm just noting those whom I know personally. So thank you so much. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded on the WCC YouTube channel, together with the previous webinars. The next webinar and last webinar, the 8th webinar, will be next Monday, and it will be focusing on the Pacific region. So thank you all, and join us for the next webinar as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.